If I can't get it through.
It says in Torah. It has to make sense. I'm not making this up, okay?
You sound like you have a little defiance in your tone.
Somebody's calling?
No,
Huh? I'm on?
No, it's you. It's
yeah, I
you
don't
being
just
on.
Oh,
accept
that's me being on.
things just because they're said.
That's fine. That's fine. No problem. No? Good to go?
The table has to have some legs.
Okay, back to Masechet Sukkah.
4B1?
4b2. We're on Daf Daled Amud Beis. And there are many principles that we have to kind of have clear before we are able to proceed. So let's do a couple of refreshers. Number one, we learned that the sukkah has to have a modicum size. But it can also be too big, at least height-wise. The sukkah represents this notion of a shelter. The shelter does not mean a place you squeeze yourself into. A coffin is not a sukkah. It's a box. A sukkah is a place where a person can find shelter. Now, there are some very small shelters, and then there are large shelters. A sukkah can actually be very big, very wide, but there's a limit how tall a sukkah could be. The Gemara told us that a sukkah cannot be more than 20 amot high, and there are a number of reasons for that. I'm not going to talk about that right now. The principle we must know is that a sukkah cannot be higher than 20 amot, meaning the schach, the covering of the sukkah, cannot be higher than 20 amot, otherwise it's too far away, we can't see it, doesn't look like a sukkah, or it's the kind of building which wouldn't be permanent, which wouldn't be temporary, would have to be permanent. And the other principle you need to know is that the smallest sukkah is 7 tfachim by 7 tfachim. A tefach is a hand's breadth, so 7 tfachim is not very, very large, just small for a person to crouch in. And the other thing we should know is that 10 tfachim high, 10 handbreadths high, is the amount that creates what's called a jurisdiction unto itself. From 10 tfachim and higher, it's its own area. So even if something has no walls, something is a platform, but if a platform will be 10 tfachim high, then it will be a platform or a reality unto itself. So far, makes sense? These are halachic realities, but they're rooted in some kind of pragmatic consideration. You really can't walk over a wall that's 10 tfachim high. You can jump over, you can vault over, but it's already a separation. 10 tfachim is a separation. 7 tfachim by 7 tfachim, that's a very, very cramped area, but it's an area where you're not squeezed or crouched, but rather an area where you're finding shelter. Small area, but enough area to provide shelter.
How would you get a table in there?
How would you get a
Or
table
never
in
mind
there?
a table, a chair.
You can sit on the floor. You don't need a chair. In fact, in North Africa, nobody had chairs. The Rambam describes what a shul used to look like in his time. And he says, but in Eretz Edom, he says, up in Europe, they used chairs. So, it seems the Rambam's time didn't have chairs at all. These are the principles at play, and with no further ado, let's get right into it. Daf Daled Amud Beis, the Gemara says, Hoisa gavaya me'esrim amma. You have a sukkah, and you have a problem. And the problem is that your sukkah is more than 20 amot high. What might you do? Well, as we learned in the previous iterations of the Gemara, one of the possibilities is building up a floor. Because you build a floor up, then the sukkah is no longer 20 amot away. So, for example, if somebody would be in a structure which is, say, under construction, can't knock the walls down. It's a steel structure. It's bricks. But the roof is exposed. And you want to have sukkot. The problem is it's 20 amot high. It's too far away. What would you do? Simple. You build a floor. And as long as from the area, the platform from which you're standing, to the schach on top, you don't have a distance of 20 amot, you have a kosher sukkah. we don't tend to think of it along those lines. We don't tend to think of building a floor. We tend to think of building the walls and building the schach. But here, we have to think outside the box because we have a sukkah that's too high, and this is going to prevent us from fulfilling the mitzvah. But now the Gemara is going to get very interesting. We have a sukkah which is higher than 20 amud high. Not a good sukkah. Ubana ba amud. So you constructed a platform. The dimensions of this platform are shehu gavoya asara tvachim. The platform is 10 tvachim high. The yesh boi hechsher sukkah. And it has within it the area that provides for a sukkah. So he doesn't say 7 amot by 7 amot because it could be round, and then it wouldn't be 7 amot by 7 amot, then the measuring would be slightly different. The point is 7 tfachim by 7 tfachim is the area. That's what is going to give you, so to speak, this notion of area of sukkah. So you have the area of a sukkah, which is the area of sheva al sheva, but that's not the point. It's an area of a sukkah. So why wouldn't you just build a floor everywhere? What if it's a very big room? It's a very big sukkah. It's an hour to Sukkot. I want to be able to fulfill the mitzvah. So if I quickly or hastily construct a platform, and the platform is going to be 10 tfachim high, and the platform will have the area of a sukkah, and then I sit on my platform, was I sitting in a sukkah? You're going to say, how could you sit in a sukkah? There's no walls. The walls are far away. You're sitting on a platform in a sukkah that's not kosher. So the Gemara explains the following. Sovar Abaya l'meimar. Abaya was of the opinion, he was considering saying the following. Gud asik michitzasa. We can use a principle, a halachic principle called gud asik. And gud asik means the walls complete themselves. And if we're in a situation where walls complete themselves, we have a mechitza. What does this mean? So let me give you an example of a good asik that you can all relate to. It's an easy situation of a good asik. In fact, we do this in our sukkah. We have a very large sukkah, as you may well remember. So the question was, do we have to have wood walls in the entirety of the sukkah, or can we have wood walls going halfway up? And the halacha is you can have wood walls going halfway up. But what about the rest of the sukkah? We say good asik. It's as if the wall completes itself. It's not even a question of being a window. If you have the walls going up a certain dimension, which would be 10 tfachim, if they're 10 tfachim high, the rest of the wall does not actually have to be a wall. It's a virtual halachic wall. It's considered a wall. Because since there's a wall in place, we consider it halachically as if the wall continues to the roof that's on top of it.
Is it because it separates two domains?
Is it because it separates two domains? Could you please explain your supposition to me?
In other words, you are inside those walls.
You are inside those walls.
Okay, so you're in a location that's
Yes.
defined by its perimeter.
Yes, but
Okay?
here's
You
why.
separate from the
No, but here's.
extraneous to the perimeter.
So you're assuming incorrectly that the principle of good asik means that you are fenced off in an area by yourself. You have a perimeter fence, a perimeter wall around you. That's what you're thinking, right?
A perimeter definer.
A perimeter definer. But here's the thing. The perimeter definer doesn't require a roof. It doesn't require good asik. Even if there was nothing on top of the roof, there is a perimeter definer. Once I have 10 tfachim, I already have a perimeter wall or a perimeter definition in place. The problem here is I actually need a wall for Sukkot. My sukkah needs to be a structure. So if my sukkah needs to be a structure and I only have a partial wall, which might be only 5%, 10%, it could be a very small amount of it. But I only have a small amount of wall coming up. Where's the rest of my wall? So the halacha is that if I have roof and I have wall, and roof and wall theoretically intersect. Right? If the roof is here and the wall continues going up, it eventually will reach it. Unfortunately for my wall, it got stuck right over here. So I say it's as if this space in the middle as if it's virtually filled.
Why the roof also completes itself?
So there's actually a discussion in the Achronim how this works, but the common school of thought is that the wall rises up. Not that the roof goes down, but the wall rises up. That's the commonly accepted school of thought. And this principle is called good asik. It's a halachic principle. The notion of good asik is not necessarily logical. It's not necessarily illogical. You can't come to this on your own. We have this principle, this concept is in the oral Torah, that there's something called good asik. And good asik could have various applications. Good asik can work for whenever we need perimeter, or whenever we need wall. So, for example, if we need to have a wall for Shabbat purposes to create a separate jurisdiction, the wall doesn't have to be an actual wall. Sometimes the wall could be a virtual wall, a hypothetical wall, a halachic wall, even though it's not an actual dense wall.
Hence the string.
Hence the string. It's not exactly so, because the string doesn't have a wall that goes up at all. So that's really of a doorpost. That's a doorway, which is also somewhat proverbial, because nobody puts any doors up there. But it's a similar halachic principle, not the same, but a similar halachic principle. The point, the similarity would be in that we don't actually have a structure. There's something missing, there are gaps in the structure, but halachically we have a principle that says it's as if those gaps were full. So this is a principle called good asik. As I said, you can't come to this on your own. It has to come from somewhere. We have a tradition. It goes back to Moses at Sinai. However, this tradition that we have about good asik, the question is, how does it apply? When does it apply? So Abaya was of the mind that if we have a sukkah, the sukkah is too large, it's 20 amot high, I need a floor. I need it to be less than 20 amot in the hollow space between the floor of the sukkah and the schach of the sukkah. I'm not able to build a floor across the whole sukkah. So he says, well, if I build a platform, why couldn't I imagine that the platform's walls kept going up? He's like in a silo. You think he's on a platform, but actually he's in a sukkah.
But wait a minute, the platform itself, let's say it sits inside the sukkah as if just the same as a bima, for example.
The platform could be a bima.
Okay, so it sits in the middle of the sukkah.
Correct.
The walls are 50 yards away.
Yeah.
Okay. Outside of that bima, it's not a sukkah.
That's correct.
Okay. So that sukkah, the fact that walls exist there is irrelevant.
The fact that there are walls in the outer perimeter are absolutely irrelevant. That's correct. Because those walls
Belong to the outside,
belong
else.
to an area that's not a kosher sukkah. Yeah. Correct. We're not using those walls.
So what are we using?
We're using imaginary walls going up from a platform.
So why have walls altogether? Build a sukkah without walls. And you have imaginary walls.
Because you have to have walls.
Right. You can't have both.
Well, yes, you could. Imaginary makes people think that's Disneyland.
Let's put a table out in the yard.
No, this is not
put something up on top of it.
Imaginary.
You got a sukkah.
Imaginary doesn't mean a fairy tale. Imaginary means conceptual. Conceptually speaking, it's as if there's a wall. There's not a wall, but there's a conceptual possibility of a wall. Why? Because a principle called good asik.
Could you put poles?
Could you put poles? 4 poles.
And then...
And could those poles be the that's the next piece of Gemara. That's the next Gemara.
So then it makes sense.
Maybe it will, maybe it won't, because there's still no mechitzot. There's still no walls.
But just like you put half a wall here.
Half a wall is a wall.
Right.
Who says poles are a wall? So this is actually this is the issue over here. You understand? That's what I said. We're not talking about. Sometimes Allah talks about very clearly defined things. Here we're invoking principles. The principle is good asik. Let me make it simple. If this were to be a wall, okay, should this be a wall? The schach is somewhere up here. I could say that since the wall began its journey up, since it reached 10 tvachim, from here to the schach is a continuation of this wall.
Except, what about that table in the middle over here?
Well, this is the question. Abaya thought, since we have a platform, the platform has walls. I mean, the platform has a defined area. So the defined area of the platform, those should be the walls. And because you have a platform that's 10 tfachim high, so the walls are 10 tfachim high. I mean, the platform has an outer parameter. So the outer parameter of the platform should just continue. You're really not getting it?
I
May-
see what you're getting at.
Maybe when you'll hear Rava's answer, you'll understand Abaya's supposition. So the Gemara says that Abaya thought to say, good asik mechitzasa, that a good asik is a mechitza, is actually a wall. Amrle Rava said, sorry, it's not going to work. Why not? We all know there's a principle, good asik. Isn't this good asik? So Rava says no. Because bi'inon mechitzot hanikarot. We need to have walls which are identifiable. Walls which are noticeable. Walls which can be seen. Veleka. And here you have no walls. Because here all you have is a platform. The platform doesn't have walls. Now, let me give you an example of how this could work. Suppose I had a platform and I did have walls coming up from the platform. The platform would lessen the hollow, would make the schach closer, but then afterwards there were walls coming up. Would it work then? Yes. How? Because once you have a wall that started, and since there's a roof, and since there's a direct line between the roof and the wall, we consider it as if the wall kept going.
But the wall is at the platform, or not at the platform.
No. I said, imagine you had a platform. Suppose this table was your platform. So from this table to the ceiling was no longer going to be 20 amot. From the floor to that ceiling, 20 amot. So what I could do is, I could build a little sukkah on this table. I would have walls erected around this table.
Oh, okay.
So if I'd have walls erected around this table, those walls, which are 10 tfachim, would simply continue going up.
Now it makes sense.
Oh, so now you understand. This was the supposition. Abaya said, you have a platform. Perfect. If you have a platform, that gives you a sukkah. Rava said, no, it doesn't. But good asik, the walls are completed. He says you have to have a wall that starts in order to complete. Here you don't have mechitzas hanikaris. It's true that the outer parameter of your platform, in theory, is a wall, but it's not a wall, it's a platform.
It's also not 10 amas, doesn't
It is 10 tfachim, it is. That's why we said the platform was 10 tfachim. So in theory, if we would see the outer parameter of the platform as being a wall, it should be good enough, because it's 10 tfachim. However, we don't have a wall altogether, because all we have is a platform.
And if you're going to build a platform, put it at the two walls end, and then all you need is the half, no?
Possibly. We talked about that in the previous Gemara.
Yeah.
That's called the itztaba. An itztaba is like a large stair, which would be against the wall. The problem with that is you might not have the opportunity to have walls on either. Even if you put it in a corner, you'd still only have two walls. Two walls is not a sukkah. You'd have to have an itztaba that went from this end of the room until this end of the room. But that's maybe a very long space. Maybe that's 1,000 feet. So you're not going to manage to build an itztaba. So you figure instead of building an itztaba, I have 15 minutes to Sukkot, I can knock together a hasty platform and I'll have a sukkah. Comes the Gemara and says no, because I have no walls. Because good asik, the conceptual completion of the wall, doesn't work unless there's actually a wall which is noticeable.
At the corners of the platform, in and by themselves, don't create
A wall,
a wall.
a mechitza, that's correct. That's exactly so. Let's take a look at Rashi. So Rashi says, Ubana ba, you built in this large sukkah that's too high, and you're too low. Schach is so high, you're so low. So he says, Ubana ba, you built in it an amud, a platform, gavaya asara, which was 10 tvachim high. Says Rashi, Rochek min hadafanais. This platform was far from the original walls of the structure. Because if it would be close to the original walls of the structure, then you could say it was just a continuation of those walls. But it's not. It's far away. Rachek min adfanas harbe. Uvoi hechsher sukkah. And there's enough to make a sukkah work. You know what the word hechsher means, right? Hechsher is like the word kosher.
Suitable.
Suitable, exactly. It's suitable for a sukkah. Meaning it has that modicum amount of space. Sheyesh birosho shiva umashahu. It has 7 and a bit. Now there's a big machlokes what Rashi means when he says 7 and a bit. Some suggest that Rashi is trying to explain that there's 7 and then a bit for the actual wall. So that's just a little lip. That is the actual wall. Others maintain that Rashi actually believes it should be Sheva Umashu. But anyway, we'll follow the approaches that he thought that this Rashi was saying. This would be 7 and then a little left over for the wall. So Abaya is not dreaming in Technicolor. There is a wall. There is a lip. If you were to take, like in theory, and make a line, a demarcation, you could identify Sheva al Sheva, and then there would be a little lip around it. So Abaya said, perfect. That lip that's around the platform, that serves as the wall. And that creates your structure. Proverbially speaking, conceptually speaking, it allows you to have a sukkah.
It's not vertical.
I'm sorry?
It's not vertical.
What's not vertical?
The lip.
The lip isn't vertical. No.
But it's still a wall.
It's still a space. In theory, it's a wall. It comprises the outer circumference of your platform.
But it's not defining a perimeter.
That's correct. It's not defining or noticeably defining a perimeter. That's exactly what Rava says. You need mechitzas anikoris. You need walls which are identifiably defining a perimeter. That's correct. As Rashi continues, Gud asik shal amud shemibachut saviv. We would think that the wall should complete itself from the outer reaches of the platform. Higbiham asara svivais reishai variyesh bahem goyva yud. You could imagine that there would be a wall, 10 tfachim. So it's 10 tfachim, it just continues up. He says there is 10 tfachim. There is, because the platform is 10 tfachim high. And therefore, v'chashuva sukkah al reishai. It's as if there's a sukkah here. V'dafnei ha'amud, the walls of the platform, dafnei seha al yedei gud asik. The walls are extended by virtue of this principle called gud asik. V'sichach shalmayla, schach shalmayla, the schach on top, koshala. It's suitable for it. The ilu l'mayla mechaf meireish ha'amud, because there aren't, they're not higher than 20 from the amud. So what you did is you created a situation where the low floor, which is far away from the high schach, is no longer an issue, because you've elevated the floor, so you're not so low anymore. And as such, the schach is not so high anymore. That was the Gemara's supposition, and the Gemara kind of says that's not going to work. So, what did we learn about again today? We learned about the notion of a sukkah being too tall, that it's problematic. We talked about how to fix that is by elevating the floor. We dealt with a situation, a minimalist situation, where somebody tried to put the area which is suitable for a sukkah, but there weren't walls. And we tried to invoke a principle called gud asik. And we learned now that gud asik can only work if there's actually identifiable parameter barrier. But if there isn't an identifiable parameter barrier, gud asik won't work. Simple. A question and an answer. And the question and answer sheds light on the jurisprudence of how the sukkah might work. Everybody got that? Good. Let's move on to the next thing then. So the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanon. And now we're going to come to your supposition. The rabbis learned, so what happens if we have a situation where Noatz Arba Kundesin, a person were to have a fixed 4 poles, Vesikeich al Gabon, and then he puts schach on top of the 4 poles.
But there's another schach on top.
No. New case.
No.
New case. I'll make it easy for you. You don't have to imagine anything. It's a chuppah. Remember what a chuppah looks like? In those pictures of the shtetl, there's children holding up the chuppah poles. Not very common these days. The pole stands by itself. How? There's a variety of ways how that could work. But if the pole is self-sufficient and standing, then if you would be able to take schach and put it on top of the poles, the question is, would that be a kosher sukkah? Fair question.
So then still a good asset could be working pole to pole.
Oh, very good. The good asik could be working horizontally, around and around, because I have a frame, I have a parameter. So the question is that good enough for good asik?
Just a pole.
Just poles. A cube. Just poles. Poles that would be a tefach thick. Poles that would have some thickness to it. Could that work? This is the Gemara's question.
Why would you determine that it has to go this way, not this way?
I don't know what this way or this way means.
You have four corners, right?
Yeah. You want to slice it in half and make it
No, make it into two triangles.
two triangles. So what does that do for you?
No, I'm saying, well, if the good asik is created by going from this pole to this pole horizontally.
Well, we got a table in the middle.
Okay.
You want to crush the people in the middle with an imaginary
no,
wall?
Wait a minute. We're having an imaginary, if we have an imaginary wall here, and that creates a real imaginary wall,
Yeah.
or an acceptable imaginary
Yeah.
wall, then we also have to imagine that there's a wall here on a diagonal.
We don't have to
between the
imagine.
opposing corners.
We don't have to imagine walls. We can follow the outer circumference of a structure. There's no mitzvah to imagine walls.
Well, it's either existing or not.
No, what's existing is the outer parameter. So the Gemara asks exactly this question. No, tzabor kundesin. Sikach hagabov, and the Gemara says we have a dispute. Rabbi Yankiv, machshir. The Tana Rabbi Yaakov, he believed that this would be sufficient to make a sukkah. V'chachamim, but the sages, poislim. They said such a sukkah is disqualified. Now let me give you an example of where this is a very real shaila that many people just don't realize. You've seen these sukkot which are made of metal frames, yeah? And what goes around the metal frame? Canvas. So the sukkot that used to be made, like that I remember from my childhood 40, 50 years ago, those sukkot, the canvas is usually very loose on it. And if the canvas is very loose, it might not be considered a halachic barrier.
Because it moves.
Because it moves too much. So every wall moves a little. When they were busy drilling the street over here, the walls in this place are moving too. Every wall moves a little. But if it moves 3 tfachim, okay, about 12 inches, back and forth, not in a gale storm, not if you're in the middle of a hurricane, but if you're in the middle of a regular breezy day, it's moving in and out like that, so what's moving in and like that is not really a wall. It means that some of the sukkot would actually not be kosher. Now, according to Yaakov, it would be kosher. Why? You got a frame.
2 poles.
You got the poles, you're good enough.
And
So-
you have no walls at all, not even your half a wall?
You might not.
You might-
You might not. So more recently, they started being much more careful about those cloth sukkahs. What I've seen now, they make it out of parachute material, and they stretch it. It's taunt. So if it's stretched in a taunt way, that would be kosher. If it's not stretched in a taunt way, if it's very, very loose, it's a problem. The problem is that if they wouldn't make it loose, after a year, 2 or 3 of being in the rain and drying and being in the rain and drying, it shrinks. And then people wouldn't be able to get it onto the rings. They wouldn't be able to get this, like, these are the kind of issues. And so it's a relatively easy sukkah to put up, but it's fraught. But this is exactly the question. You put up 4 poles, so you have a cube, and you covered it with schach. Rabbi Yaakov says, that works. The Chachamim say, no, that does not work. So we have to understand what exactly is the machlekes. Why does Rabbi Yaakov say it should work, and why do Chachamim say it doesn't work? So the Gemara now sets out to explain the dispute, the jurisprudence, the theory behind the dispute. Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna said, Machlokas al sfas hagag. The dispute here is when the poles occupy the outer reaches of the roof. Now, you're thinking, roof? Well, there's a roof here. Okay, so let's step back for a moment. Once upon a time, it was very common for people to use their roofs. In certain parts of the world, they still use the roof. Instead of having to build anything. Instead of having a backyard where you have no real estate, you have a rooftop. Recently, it's become very popular in urban areas like Miami Beach, where the hotels started having rooftop areas. Why waste the real estate of having a sprawling, open kind of courtyard? Put them on the roof.
You don't have to go very far. Go on to North Park.
They also have a rooftop area? Okay. People like it. Tall, closer to the sun. Nice lights at night. So, if it's in the outer reaches of a roof, which means, let's imagine that this Gemara is the area of a roof. Okay, so if there's a pole that's placed in the 4 corners here, from Rabbi Yaakov's perspective, when he says gud asik, what is continuing up? What comprises the wall? You can't just have a cube. Cubes itself are not a wall. Gud asik is a real principle, but gud asik has to have something to start with. So, according Rav Huna says, the machlekes, the dispute here was asfas agag. The Rabbi Yaakov is of the opinion, amrinan gud asik mechitzasa. We say that the walls of the building just keep going up. In other words, the building itself is extended. This is not a platform. It's a building. There's people living inside here. There's living space, living quarters. And the living quarters are surrounded, the outer circumference, with walls. So Rabbi Yaakov said, perfect. Now you took those walls and you extended them. You extended them. So the walls go up. But Rabbanan Savri, the Rabbanan say, no. Lo yamrinan gud asik mechitzasa. We do not say that there's a continuation of the wall when there isn't a wall you can see. In other words, this is like taking the case further. Before we talked to a situation where there were no walls. It was just a platform. Abaye tried to visualize walls around the platform. And as Rashi said, it was an area of a sukkah with a little lip around it. So Abaye tried to visualize, okay, can we conceive of the walls or the outer parameter of the platform being actual walls? And Rava said, no. Why? Because there are no walls. There are no walls. You have a platform. You don't have walls. So the Gemara now says, okay, here we have a dispute between Rabbi Yaakov and the Rabbanan, and the dispute was, we do have walls. Well, the problem is the walls aren't exactly showing up in the sukkah. The walls are underneath the sukkah because the roof of whatever's underneath it is now the floor of the sukkah. So we have walls coming up, and those walls end with a roof here, and Rabbi Yaakov is imagining that those walls just keep going up with the poles, because there are poles that are inserted in 4 corners. And because you have poles inserted in 4 corners, he says, well, the building just keeps going.
The intent was the walls would stop at the roof.
The intent was originally, that's true, but conversely, if we would have walls, for example, on the top going up, we would have actual walls on the rooftop, and then we would put schach on top. Even if the walls didn't go to the top, it would be a good sukkah. Everybody would say it's a good sukkah.
But if the roof was built intentionally with
If the
below
roof had
the
a
surface.
parapet.
If the roof had a parapet, it would be fine. The problem is not so much the intent here. The problem is that you don't see a wall. All you see is roof. There is a wall, but it's not visible. So it's kind of like the discussion between Abaye and Rava, only with Abaye and Rava, there really were no walls at all. Here, there are walls. The problem is that the walls end.
Well, the question
And we don't see the walls continuing. The question is, can we see the walls as continuing or not?
The question is that perimeter, is the roof over the walls, or is the roof between the walls?
I mean, like an age.
No, you have,
Look,
which is it?
look.
It's like this.
The-
Which is it? Is it the roof over the walls? Okay? Or is the roof between the walls?
So the thing is this, Ami, it wouldn't actually make a difference how it's constructed.
Because if it's between, the walls are independent and
It,
continue.
even if the walls were built in such a fashion where the wall comes up this way and then the roof is inserted. But the fact is, when you're looking at the top of the roof, you don't see any walls. So even though there's a wall here, there's a wall here. And instead of the roof lying this way, the roof was inserted into the wall. The fact remains that when you look at this, you don't see walls coming up. The wall ends with the roof. There were 4 poles that were placed here. Rabbi Yaakov conceptually sees this wall simply continuing. The Rabbanan say, no. A wall underneath the roof or next to the roof is not enough to create the situation of good asik. This is one approach. This is Rav Huna, who's in a much later time going back, revisiting the dispute between Rabbi Yaakov and the Rabbanan and trying to explain what they were arguing about. But as we're going to see, the Gemara actually has another approach. So let's take a look in Rashi before we go further. Rashi says, Machlekes, Rav Huna said the argument, the dispute here was al sfas hagag. The mechitzes habayis, he says the argument is when it's at the edge of the roof. Because the walls of the house, tachtel, the walls of the house beneath it, kineged bein hakundesin, which are really corresponding to the area between these poles. Ve'ikala meimar, and therefore we could say between these poles there are walls, and those walls are good asik. Those walls complete themselves. V'hacha, and here lo yamrinan, perhaps we would not say the be'inon mechitzes nikares, that you need to have visible walls, because they are visible walls. Even if they're not visible in your particular area, your structure doesn't have visible walls, but the walls are walls. This is not a platform. This is a building, and there are real walls. Would that be good enough? Aval be'emtza hagag, but if you were to build this structure in the middle of a roof, she'ein tachtel mechitzes saviv, underneath there really are no walls. You're in the middle of the roof. So then divrei hakil psulan. Everybody would agree it's not kosher. V'leidaya barba kondesin. It would not be enough with the 4 poles. Liyesh la shem dal mechitzes, that it should be called having 4 walls. So the Gemara says, this is the first piece of the Gemara. But Rav Nachman Amar, Rav Nachman had a different approach. He said, Be'emtza hagag machlekes. The dispute is if it's actually built in the middle of the roof. What would the dispute be? Says Rashi, Aval yedei hakundesin, and by virtue of these poles, Rabbi Yaakov machshira. Rabbi Yaakov considers it to be a valid structure. He considers the walls to be in place. Ukegoin, for example, sheheim rochav tefach, that these poles are the breadth, the diameter of a tefach, the thickness of a tefach, l'chol tzidei, all around. Which, if it's the depth of a tefach, the ikar shem mechitzas tefach, there is some kind of wall. It's not a pole. It's a tefach. It's a little wall.
Tefach is about a fist.
Hand's breadth, yeah. So you're talking about a wall. It's a little wall. And he says, therefore, there is a little bit of a wall, and the wall would be a tefach ladorim. There's a space of tefach in the south side, and then that's called a little wall. There's a tefach mizrach. There's a tefach in the east side. There's a tefach lamayrov. There's a tefach in the west side. B'chol achas v'achas. Each one of these is a small wall. And so we would say that the walls complete themselves not from top to bottom, but as you wanted to say, horizontally, because there's already a tefach. Now, incidentally, this actually does work to some degree, because the halacha is if we have 2 walls, you have 2 walls of a sukkah, then you have a third wall, which is only a half a wall, only a piece of a wall, as long as it's a tefach. If it's not too far away from the other 2 walls, it can actually be considered the third wall. So there is a principle of a tefach extending, where you have a slender wall, a strip of a wall, which extends. But that's when you have 2 whole walls, and now you're trying to create a third wall. So if you have a third wall, when you have 2 whole walls, a slender wall can be extended. But here, where you have no walls, it doesn't work. Rabbi Yaakov is the other opinion that would work. All the walls are extended. The walls extend horizontally. The Rabbanan said, no, it doesn't. It's true that sometimes a tefach could work, but that's only when there are 2 proper walls already. So then an add-on wall, that could be sufficient. But when I have no walls at all, Yeah, they have nothing. You have a cupola, you have a chuppah. You don't have a structure. So he says, to complete a structure, it can work. To be the structure, that's another story. But this, according to Rav Nachman, was the discussion of the Gemara. That was actually the opinion of Rabbi Yaakov. As Rashi goes on to explain, the Rabbanan Savri law, the Rabbanan say, Loi mischashra ella b'shtei mechitzes. It can only work when there's already two proper walls, kel chasan. Kishir meshach sukkah, which is already the size of a sukkah. Ubishlishis, when there's a third wall. Okay, he says, then efilo tefach. So according to Rev Huna, the argument was about good asik, about the walls of the house continuing. You had walls of a home, walls of a building. Could the building continue up? Rav Yaakov said yes. The Chachamim said no. According to Rav Nachman, the dispute was not when the poles were at the edges of the outer parameter of the structure, but rather it could be in the middle of the roof. How did it work then? What was Rabbi Yaakov thinking? So Rav Nachman says he was thinking that good asik doesn't only work from top to bottom, good asik works from right to left. And we actually have such a principle. So Rav Nachman says, okay, you have a tefach. So the tefachim complete each other. The Rabbanan come along and say, the rabbi said, sorry, the tefach can only begin something to be completed when there's already two complete walls. Two walls are somewhat of a structure. Two walls already are a corner. You know, you can get shelter in two walls. So you have two walls, a third wall can complete the electromagnet. It can create a full structure. But if you don't have any walls at all, that's not a structure. Not even a virtual structure, not even a conceptual structure, not even a halachic reality structure. It's just not a structure and not a sukkah. You still have a question? Okay. So now the Gemara comes back and says, okay, tell me the following. Iboyelahu, says the Gemara, I have a question. The Emtza Hagag Machlekes. If we follow Rav Nachman's approach, the dispute was in the middle of the roof. Aval Sfas Hagag. What if it would be the way Rav Huna portrayed it? Well, according to Rav Nachman, if the case of Rav Huna would come before Rav Nachman, would you say Divrei Hakol Kshera? Would the Rabbanan agree that the actual wall should be completed with good asik? Because the whole dispute was when it was in the middle of the roof. But if it's in the outer parameter of the roof, would the Rabbanan say, oh, that's fine, that works? Or would we say not so? Oidilma, perhaps, bein bezu ubein bezu machlekes. Perhaps we say Rabbi Yaakov and the Rabbanan were arguing in either possibility, in either scenario. This is the question. The question is the way Rav Huna and Rav Nachman explained the Haviyah, the question of the Gemara. Did they actually mean to rule out the other one's possibility, saying that that would not be an issue? Or were they just talking about different things, but actually they agree? The argument could go either way. Rav Huna's scenario would be an argument, and Rav Nachman's scenario would be an argument. So the Gemara says, that's a really good question. And we don't know the answer. Gemara says Teku. Teku is an acronym for Tishbi, Yetaretz Kushas Vabayis. Eliyahu Hanavi is called the Tishbite. Eliyahu Tishbi, he will answer all these questions. So
let's wait for the Mashiach.
Well, in other words, we don't know the answer. So when the rabbi, we would say that both of those situations would not be kosher because we don't know that they are kosher. So whether the walls continue up or whether it's a question of a tefach, in either situation, we don't have the certitude of saying, in this case, the Rabbanan would agree. You have to remember that the Rabbanan, the majority opinion. Rabbi Yaakov's opinion would be nullified by the majority opinion. The question is, what would the majority opinion say here? According to Rav Nachman, would the majority opinion agree that good asa could work if there were actually walls? Maybe not. The Gemara says, we don't know. We don't know. So in the end, whether you have a platform with imaginary walls that can't be completed, even it extends even to a situation where you have an actual building with real walls, we'll still say the walls cannot continue. So you learned about good asik. And you learned about how far we can push the envelope of good asik, how much we can conjecture up or imagine good asik might work. And we also see the limitations. It's a real concept, but even conceptual realities have limitations. And the Gemara doesn't know with certitude, so the Gemara finishes off with the idea of teku. Having said this now, the next piece of Gemara is going to discuss this business of putting poles in the ground and then putting a roof schach on top. And the question is, we have all kinds of questions within that. How does that whole thing work itself out? We shall continue.
Thank you very much.
Sorry we're finishing early. I literally